What I try to tell you, this country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the woman.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hey kids, welcome to Grumpy Nostalgia, the Second Look Cinema podcast, the show where we go back to the blockbuster new release wall of our memory. We grab a copy off the shelf, we pop it in our VCR, and we see what time has done to it. I'm Justin, that's Mike.
Que pasa mi gente?
Together, we're helping you navigate all the landmines littered down memory lane. So, Mike, it's been a while since we've been together. Our audience wouldn't know that, but
No.
we keep putting out quality material, even in the midst of hurricanes. Mike.
That's right. It's like you remember the Golden Girls? How every now and then they would have the acclaimed flashback episode where they would just show scenes from other episodes, and it would just be they're basically eating cheesecake in the kitchen, and that's us. We're eating cheesecake in the kitchen.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Mike.
There you go.
So, Mike, every once in a while, a movie comes along, our page here where we figure out, is this something we want to cover? How do we even approach this? What kind of strategy do we take? We haven't answered any of those questions with this movie, so we're just going to push ahead, Mike. We're going to talk about Scarface this week.
Yes, this is a genre-breaking kind of movie, I guess, right?
It broke something. So let's just kind of jump right in because we screwed around long enough, and our internet's not good tonight, guys. So we don't know how long we're going to last. So here we go. Certain
Let's
amount of
get this train wreck moving.
yeah, hit the bottom is freeing in a way, isn't it? Like
That's right.
nothing left to lose.
Nothing.
All right, so this is directed by our friend Brian DePalma. Mike, of course, he's done 44 movies, among them such hits as The Bonfire of the Vanities, The Body Double, which is actually a pretty good one, Blowout,
My favorite.
the original Carrie, which is a great one there. He also did a very bizarre movie called Phantom of the Paradise, which is has to be seen to be believed. It's like a musical fable where this songwriter sells his soul to the devil and shenanigans ensue, Mike.
Yeah, it's very Faustian.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was directed by a guy named Oliver Stone, Mike, that Oliver Stone, who received a $300,000 check for writing this movie, which in 1983 was unheard of. This was during many of his coked out phases, I'm guessing, Mike.
Yeah, I'm guessing he was, this was one of those anti-drug kind of,
right.
He's saying something. I guess.
They say right what you know. He certainly did.
That's right.
He certainly did. So he also did some other movies you might have heard of called Platoon, Wall Street, Conan the Barbarian, JFK. The original screenwriting credits, of course, went to Howard Hawks and Ben Hecht, who did the original Scarface with Paul Mooney in 1932, which is a remake of, believe it or not, 61 years later, of course. I don't think all the hip hop community is aware of that, Mike. We'll get to that hip hop affiliation here in a minute. This had a budget of a whopping $50 million, Mike.
Wow,
for the life of me, I can't figure out where that went.
It went up Pacino's nose.
Possibly, that's a good point. Oh, it was a holiday release, Mike. Merry Christmas from our gang, the Bloody Gang.
You get the Miami snow.
December 9th, 1983. So Mike, this movie is it really goes without saying for a lot of things, but let's say something anyway. And why don't we start by why don't we say hello to our little cast, Mike? So why don't you get us started?
Yeah, well, Al Pacino needs no introduction. He can play Italian, he can play Cuban, and hey,
well, he has played both.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like he had a very good he must have had some good dialect coaches with this because he pulled off the Spanish pretty well, and hey, man, I don't know if we could get away with that nowadays.
He has appropriated that accent for everybody else after him. So if you want to sound, Cuban, you sound like Pacino and Scarface.
You're Tony Montana. Yeah. It's like if you want to be Southern, you're Vivian Lee and Donna Flynn. But yeah, I think the most egregious cast member had to be Robert Loggia as as Lopez, if you can stomach that one. But
Well, he looks Hispanic, doesn't he?
well, he's got to live in Florida if he's doing those orange juice commercials. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a great, he's a great tough guy.
Again with the oranges, I love it.
Yes, again, I couldn't resist. We had seen him previously, I think, in Independence Day.
Just inside joke for no one knows what we're talking about. Robert Loggia pitched orange juice to children in the 70s.
Yes, and it was so off-putting in a way. It was akin to Wilford Brimley talking about diabetes.
Good morning. I'm Wilford Brimley, and I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about diabetes.
It's like that kind of what? And the only Cuban in the main cast is Stephen Bauer. He's Manny, Tony's best bud. Who kind of grows up with and grows the business with. Stephen Bauer is also in Ray Donovan. He kind of makes I couldn't think of any of the movies he was in just off the top of my head, but I knew he was in the TV show, and I thought he was great in this movie.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how good his role was. I thought we'll get more into, I guess, but there was a lot of nuance to what he represents and what Tony represents. But yeah, I thought he was good. F. Murray Abraham, who we last saw in Last Action Hero, plays another Hispanic guy named Omar.
Sure, why not?
I mean, if he could be Salieri, and be Jewish in Homeland, he can be, he can be a Omar the Cuban. I'm guessing.
It's just a note.
He gets
a note to our listeners. The F in F. Murray Abraham is a verb here, guys. Sorry.
He has a really checkered movie career. He's been in some real stinkers, but he's also he's been in these some famous
good
classics.
or bad. He's great in it.
I know, right? He'd choose it. Are women who if you're a female actor or actress in Scarface, I apologize. You get kind of short shrifted. Michelle Pfeiffer, who relative unknown. I think she was in Grease too before this. This is the only thing I can think of. Beautiful as ever, but her role is kind of just to be the arm candy for Lopez and for Tony, and then she just kind of disappears after getting coked
bails
up.
out,
yeah, she bails. Mary Elizabeth Mastro Antonio is in this as Tony's sister, his younger sister, who he has a weird kind of thing with. Doesn't like guys touching her. Apparently, even his best bud Manny shouldn't be with her. We saw her in we haven't watched The Abyss yet.
We tried. We gave it our shot, but
eventually, audience will do Abyss. But yeah, she gets her. I realized looking at this cast that only one of them technically made it out alive, and she probably had to go to the rehab clinic after the
hairdresser.
Exactly right. She's always at the hairdresser, and she's just boring. She just does.
That might be the tightest perm in movie history. I don't know. We digress.
that is not a Tony perm. And then they had Uncle Hector from Breaking Bad, who was kind of a henchman for the bad boys from Bolivia.
Mr. Salamanca,
yeah. So and as I'm going to leave it there. There's your cast.
All right, Mike. Thank you very much. So Al Pacino famously did this movie. He's famous for it. He just turned 84 years old. He became a father at 83 to his son Roman. He famously has twins with Beverly D'Angelo as well.
Oh, I forgot about it.
A child at 83 years old. Wow.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that he and Michelle Pfeiffer teamed up later to be in Frankie and Johnny.
Yeah.
I saw it at the theater, years after.
Speaking of Michelle Pfeiffer, she replaced Glenn Close, who got the role, but the studio didn't feel she was sexy enough, Mike.
I agreed.
Yeah, so there you go. You mentioned Harris Yulin. That's the guy that played Hector Salamanca, Breaking Bad fame. And Stephen Bauer was also in Breaking Bad as a drug kingpin there. So those two.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
This movie had 3 X ratings before it finally got released. Interesting, Mike, the last hang up on the X rating was, of course, due to violence, but they shot the clown too many times. Remember at the end of the scene there where
Octavia
the clown, which I'm still disturbed by that scene altogether.
Yeah, I forgot he was.
Generally, I applaud clowns getting murdered, but It's when I couldn't understand the relevance of it, but whatever.
Well, he was from
Okay.
Venezuela, so I don't think they
Well,
liked him
he
very
had it
much.
coming then. So, but yeah, this had, like I said, it finally got the studio's blessing to get released. There was a 2003 re-release. This movie, of course, has been embraced by hip hop culture, almost single-handedly. It's the only movie they watch. However, they wanted to do a re-release in 2003 where they featured songs by modern hip hop artists to replace the soundtrack,
Oh,
and DePalma said, "No way." He probably said no effing way, Mike, because there's 226
yeah.
F words in this movie. And it's
Wow.
2 hour and 7 minute runtime. That's an F word every 48 seconds, Mike. So
That's got to be up there with like
yeah,
Casino or
it's
Wolf of Wall
I bet.
Street or something.
I want a special shout out to superfan Dr. K. During a pub visit last weekend, we were talking about this, and he mentioned that the band Blink 182 derived their name from the number of times the Pacino says the F word himself, which is
Huh.
182. So shout out, Mr. K. You're actually right. Who did the research?
Wow.
We did it over several pub beers and retro video games and pinball machines. It was a fun time. So thanks again for that afternoon, Dr. K. Expense to Fort Lawn Animal Clinic. Wonderful. It was shot in L.A. because the fever caused by the local Cuban community, we wouldn't allow them to shoot locally. You had a body count of 42 people here, Mike. 42
Good
deaths in this
gosh.
movie. Steven Spielberg was on set. Him and Brian De Palma, of course, are very close. And Spielberg actually co-directed the final scene. Mike, he shot a lot of
Huh.
the floor level stuff during this scene, uncredited.
It's funny that's the one thing I know about, Brian De Palma is he's the king of like the one shot. Like he's like you talk about a movie like
Yeah.
Snake Eyes, where it has like a famous scene where they're going to like a boxing match and like it's
All
all one
one shot.
shot.
Yeah.
It's like the because the good and Goodfellas, the scene at the club, and I thought it's surprising he needed help
Yeah.
to shoot it. I guess that's interesting. They had to bring in a heavy
I
hitter.
think it was more of a collaboration than anything else, but I think it was just really cool. Why
Yeah,
have we done Snake Eyes, Mike? Brian De Palma and Nick Cage?
I know. Well, it's coming up.
It's forcing itself to be done by a.
That's right.
There's a television edit for this film that's 30 cut
Oh,
out 32 minutes, Mike.
oh no,
I have not seen that. Then,
I don't. That's
but
terrible.
I have a little backstory about my personal history of this movie, and we'll get to that here a little bit later. So we mentioned this came out in 1983. This was in theaters along with the Christmas Story and Yentl, Mike. Imagine having that on the marquee.
This would be a good movie to have Mandy Patinkin in it as a Cuban.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, this came out on December 9th, along with on that weekend we had the movie Christine, and another movie with a famous catchphrase, Sudden Impact, like Clint Eastwood. That was the
Oh,
Make My
yeah.
Day movie.
Mandy
Yeah.
Day.
I also had in theaters that month Silkwood and, of course, DC Cab, which was the real Oscar bait of all these,
Oh,
Mike.
thank you, Gary Busey.
So in 1983, Return of the Jedi, of course, was the number one movie that year, followed closely by Tootsie and Flashdance, Trading Places, which is a movie we did together. Interesting twist on that episode. Guys, you should listen to that, see what's different about it. Hint, hint. Number five movie that year was War Games, and Scarface didn't hit, it was only in the top 40, Mike, number 40 that year.
Oh,
And
wow.
this is the year that another non-ethnic actor, Ben Kingsley, won for playing Gandhi.
Couldn't happen
Yeah.
nowadays. So, was in its release, was Scarface considered a bomb? Or for being that low on the list, I thought it would have been, especially a holiday movie, you thought it would have brought in more gross.
It did not have the gross it was hoping for. It pulled in about $5 million on its $50 million budget. But again, you got to
Wow.
remember that back in the 80s, they didn't have 3,500 theater rollouts back then, and you had a lot of competition.
True.
So, but I think this movie got us to one way or the other. We'll get to that here in our section at the end. So let's talk about music in 1983, Mike. We always love to talk about music in the 80s. So here's the top 5 on the AP Top 40. You had Say It Isn't So by Hall & Oates. Say by Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder.
Oh, the scene where they put on the clown makeup.
That's a hard one to watch. Maybe the demise of music video is not such a bad thing after all. Earworm Extraordinaire, Uptown Girl by Billy Joel.
Yeah.
Not a fan. Nothing Gonna Break My Stride by Matthew Wilder. There's a great video.
Well, are you talking about the commercial for adult diapers or the actual video?
Imagine if Weird Al and Doug Henning had a baby, it would be Matthew Wilder.
It's Matt.
And the number five song was our friend John Cougar Mellencamp. John Cougar Mellencamp had 2 songs on the top 10 there. When Walls Come Tumbling Down and Little Pink Houses, Mike. So there you go.
For you and me.
Speaking of music, back in 1983, auteur Frank Zappa invented file sharing without knowing it. He was, of course, a huge defender of musicians' rights and was always trying to find ways to circumvent the traditional studio system. So he came up with the idea of using the newfangled internet as a way to distribute music. I think he took that a little too far, but he was the first guy that kind of got that ball rolling. Here's a fun story. Publishing magnate Larry Flynt. This was the year that he started sending Hustler magazine to every member of Congress every month. And he has continued to do so to this day. So every month, 535 issues of Hustler get sent out to the Capitol, Mike. So there you go.
They still publish a Hustler?
Oh, yeah. Wow. Allegedly, I wouldn't know, Mike, because I'm above such thing.
I'm really confident. I was like, wow.
Now, speaking of magazine, this was the year that Vanity Fair started, which is odd. Like, I didn't realize that. I thought it was a much older magazine, but first issue of Vanity Fair came out in 1983. This was the year that they invented wacky wall walkers, Mike, not wacky wafers, mind you, your delicacy of choice, but this is the wacky wall walker, which is essentially wet plastic that's crawled down a wall.
Like an octopus.
They worked until they hit the carpet and got all the dog hair on them, and then they were useless.
Oh, yeah.
You could tell time with your Swatch watch, Mike. Everybody was collecting the Swatch watches back then. That was the big thing. The biggest book that year was the movie Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Probably his most disturbing novel, to the point where he admits that himself. In fact, his wife Tabitha begged him not to publish this book because of its subject matter and its dark tone. And if you ever read that book, Tabitha was onto something. It does hit you. But speaking of hit you, Mike, this movie is ultra violent, ultra realistic, ultra gritty, ultra 80s. You can't get much more 80s than that. We've got a little piece at the end there to talk about that kind of phenomenon, but 80s AF, as the kids say, Mike.
Yes, it just screams at me.
Yeah. So I think there's nothing left to do but to get to it, Mike. So
let's put on our gold medallions and unbutton our top 3 buttons on our shirt.
I'll find some floral outfits and we'll get started. So hit the button, Mike.
There you go.
All right, so we open up in 1980, where a young Cuban refugee named Tony Montana claims asylum in Miami along with his friend Manny, played by Stephen Bauer. They get sent to essentially a detainment camp, a government camp, Mike, where he gets, they call it Freedom Town, where he gets interviewed by some immigration agents, and they realize that he's bad news, but they take him in anyway. And they all get sent to this.
I love that they supply all the residents of Freedom Town with the equal length 2x4s. That was really nice of them.
Welcome to America. And they just kind of live in this little internment camp out of the I-95 Expressway in Miami. So he's stuck there. And while he's there, he's approached by some other guys from the outside, from Cuba, the Cuban mafia. They meet with him to say, if you do the hit on this one guy who's also been put into that internment camp, who had done some crimes in Miami, if they take him out, Mike, they'll earn their green cards and get their freedom. So they that's where they make their turn, Mike. That's when they jump to the dark side. They do this hit. Pretty easy hit, if you'd ask me, Mike.
Yeah.
The guy probably would have died in 48 hours.
Yeah, he didn't like he was going to lie. He's kind of like a kid diddler in prison. Yeah. I mean, he was a target from when he showed up.
But so they do that hit and they get out, and they take advantage of their newfound freedom by washing dishes across the street. So as they're washing dishes, they get recruited. F. Murray Abraham and his partner pull up in their giant Ford Victoria, and Mandy's got an inside with him, and they talk, and F. Murray wants them to. The acting from F. Murray Abraham, he reminded me of the guy in Reefer Madness who has that grin on his face. He's like,
I was like, oh my, he's coked up like
he was either acting coked up or he was coked up in real life. I think it's the latter.
Yes,
but
great.
he's like wild-eyed from frame one. And of course, Tony's very confrontational. He doesn't take anything very nicely, and so there's a little back and forth there. And F. Murray says, "Well, you know what? Here's $25,000. Go make this buy from this cocaine dealer called Hector the Toad, Mike. He's got a
Yes.
couple of kilos of yayo, Mike. They call it yayo.
Yeah.
So Pacino says, "Okay, we'll do that, no problem." So we cut to the next day, and of course the buy goes sideways, Mike, and
Just a
Tony
little.
and Manny bring their crew in there, and Hector's got a very odd woman on the bed watching soap operas with a shotgun, and of course it goes sideways, and a couple of Tony's friends get put into the bathtub and get some chainsaws come out, and he can put the rest together there, guys. He's there to take his money. So they actually pull it out where, the guns start flying. Tony kills everybody and gets the money and the cocaine, Mike, which is a bonus. And then he hightails it out in the street, in the middle of the street. No cops, no nothing. Jumps in Manny's convertible, and then they fly off.
And away they
go. And we got a movie. So they bring this money back to F. Murray's boss, Frank, played by Robert Loggia, where they gain favor with him. That's where they also meet Frank's arm candy, Elvira, played by Michelle Pfeiffer here, who's not really happy to be anywhere at any time.
No, she's always disgruntled.
Yep. Always taking little finger hits of cocaine just to get through the whole thing. So, there's a big section of the movie where Tony's kind of moving up the chain, and he's gained a lot of favor with his loyalty and all that good stuff with these mob kingpins, and it goes well, but so well that fact that Frank sends him down to Bolivia with F. Murray to meet with this Alejandro Sosa, who's a major drug importer exporter guy. Like he's the Art Vandelay of drugs, Mike.
That's right. Yeah, don't ask any more questions.
Yeah.
He just.
So we get to see how terrible F. Murray's bargaining skills are, because he's just nervous and indecisive and wishy-washy, and kind of sort of ruins the deal a little bit. But he's got reason to be that nervous, Mike, because he actually turns out he's an FBI informant. And Alejandro had heard about this, and they separate the two. And the next thing you know, he's got Tony sitting in this little market square. They're having
his little nine.
Yeah, either sitting at a table, enjoying the lemons with the water in it, which you're supposed to use to like refresh your hands. But Tony, of course, takes out the lemon and starts eating it. And as they look above, they see F. Murray Abraham dangling from a helicopter, hanged, Mike. So that went well. But Tony brokers this deal on his own, and he comes back and gets Frank very mad because he made some allowances that Frank didn't agree to, who were more aggressive than he typically would have done. And then Frank, he suddenly Tony Montana is suddenly out of favor with Frank. Frank doesn't like this, so he secretly orders a hit on Tony. Of course, that hit doesn't go down. Tony,
it ruined the Babylon.
That's right, it sure did. And then Tony gets winds of this, of course, and then he shows up and exacts his revenge by shooting Frank, and then shooting the crooked cop that he was established with, and everybody else that's in there that looked at him wrong. And he kind of usurps the power of the gang, and he also usurps Elvira.
Takes the girl.
She's just property of the mafia, apparently. So. There's a very uncomfortable section of the movie where he starts to win, courting her favor, developing a relationship there, Mike. And this is where about 70 minutes of the movie get compressed into a 3-minute, probably the greatest montage of all time.
Yes, Rocky be damned, man. These are some. This is one of the greatest montages of the 80s.
Yeah, so it's set to the song called "Push It to the Limit."
Not pushing it.
So
push it.
Yeah, so I went to YouTube to watch the "Push It to the Limit" video, Mike, and I forget the guy's name, of course, because we're recording live. But I saw something and I pushed it. And I thought, this can't be it. This has to be a satire of it. And to my dismay, Mike, I found out that it is actually the real video.
Yes.
Eric Hellebring I think is the guy's name, but I can't remember. But we have to insist that everyone listen to this podcast. Go to YouTube when you're done. Type in the search, push it to the limit, dash Scarface, just to know, just so we can connect on some sort of psychic level. So we've all can have bonded after seeing this video.
That's right. Oh yeah, the walking right into the camera.
But it's just fantastic. But what it is actually very efficient, Mike, because South Park inspiration notwithstanding, you get a lot of exposition here. You get Tony's rise, you get the money that they're making, you get the wedding, you get him.
That's right.
You know,
laundering cash,
bonding with Gina and her family again, opening Gina's little hair salon.
That's right. Open up Montana properties.
The fledgling relationship between hidden relationship between Gina and Manny gets established here. So a lot of movie gets taken out in this short little music video. So well done, Brian DePalma. But when the montage is over, so is Tony's chances for a happy ending here, because this is where the greed and the paranoia and typical.
He gets high on his own supply.
Yeah,
it ruins.
This is where Act 3 of every story like this. This typically what follows suit. Elvira bails out on him. Alejandro's had enough of Tony and his erratic behavior. He sends a hitman out to him. He finds out that Gina is having a romance with Manny. So he kills Manny, and then he kills Gina. So just takes care of that. When he sees what he's done, he can't live with the guilt. But there's no time for that, Mike, because his mansion is being raided by Alejandro's henchmen. And this is the famous scene at the end that everybody glamorizes. This is the shootout scene where Tony does about 8 pounds of cocaine, gets shot, I think 12 times, Mike. He shoots off his AR-15 with the grenade launcher, and then gets shot in the back with a shotgun, and then falls into his pool. That ironically has the world is yours logo right above it. And that's our movie. And there you go. So yada yada yada.
Everyone dies.
The end. The only people that don't die are the people that got left Tony. So
yeah, it didn't like Forrest Gump, and she doesn't have an overdose in a hotel hallway somewhere.
But that's it, and that was we just summarized 3 hours worth of film into that little dissertation there, guys. But we can't tell you the whole movie. You got to watch it and enjoy yourself.
And the video. Make sure you watch.
You got to see the video. We beg you.
Please.
So let's talk awards and accolades a little bit before we proceed here, Mike. So this opened, as we mentioned, not a big opening, about 4.6 million. Ended up doing about 46 million total, so not a big hit. But I think the cult status of this makes up for that, of course. It ended up doing $66 million on the world stage, so it did make some money back. Okay. Got 3 Golden Globe nominations. They did not win any of them. It is often regarded as the inspiration for the Grand Theft Auto franchise from 1997. That's when that started. That basically follows this plot to a T. We talked about its admiration. It's been embraced by the hip hop community. Everybody, there's actually a guy named Scarface. If you ever watched MTV's Cribs, when I went to a hip hop or a rapper's house, they had generally life-size paintings, oil paintings of this movie.
Do they own their own tiger?
So there you go. This movie is easy to glamorize, of course, if you're into crime and all that kind of stuff. So it's ranked number 8 cult film of all time by Entertainment Weekly. I think the cult status has cemented itself. This movie, again, wasn't a commercial or critical success, but the advent of VHS and cable really supported this movie being seen by a lot of people. Probably that shouldn't have seen it at that very young age, very impressionable. But it's out there, and it's say what you want about it, Mike. But a lot of people love this movie to this day, and to each their own, I suppose. But there you go.
Yeah, it makes an impression. You can't argue with that.
Okay, so let's talk about our grumpy meter. This is the part of the podcast where me and Mike talk about the films we watched when we were younger guys, and then we watch them again as grumpy old jerks to see how our impressions have changed with maturity or whatever. So, Mike, why don't you head us off?
Unfortunately, I did not see this movie in the 80s. I probably ended up watching it, I don't know, sometime in the 90s on just DVD or HBO Max or something.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, HBO. I I'd seen parts of it over time. It has so many, these kind of scenes where like, oh yeah, that scene, fly pelicans or little friend, or the famous line where he says, "I don't lie even when I'm lying," or always tell the truth even when I'm
Yeah.
lying," which is one of my favorite lines. But yeah, it has appeal to it. It's really dated itself. I can understand why DePalma doesn't want to change the music, but once you start hearing the synthesizer and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Yeah, it really dates itself with the soundtrack. But it's a nice snapshot of, Miami, and exaggerated, of course, but it's the same way like you would say that, um, a movie like, White Heat with James Cagney,
Yeah. Yeah.
exaggerates,
40s,
gangsterism.
40s New York. Yeah.
Yeah, but it also, it has an origin in the truth and the drug trade in Miami in the 80s. I mean, you can watch, 100 documentaries about how they
Yeah.
flew in all this coke and brought in boats, and they even mention in the movie in this one where they, talk about how the different ways they have to bring it in from Panama or
Well,
from,
yeah. I mean, they actually
Colombia.
threw in a lot of stock footage that was appropriate to the time. This married up with the narrative
Yeah,
perfectly, So
I yeah, and like I say, even the start kind of tells you, okay, yeah, some of these Cubans were good, but some of them were bad, and it was true. It's just the way everything is. It's the way it is today with immigrants that come from Mexico.
Yeah.
You get the good and the bad. But that aside, I don't know why Frank Lopez has a picture of RFK and Nixon behind him. That was it's kind of a weird combo. But on its surface, it's just bang bang shoot shoot, violence, sex, misogyny. But I do like the shift that Tony goes from communism is terrible, terrible to capitalism is terrible, terrible. He actually deals with like real legitimate banquets,
Yeah.
and talking about how these guys are as bad as Castro. It's not very subtle, but it is a nice way to kind of book in the movie. And, he's kind of betrayed by both,
Yeah.
the US and Cuba. And, like I said, the two-dimensional part of it aside, it had some great Pacino was great in it. And as I'm watching, I'm thinking the guy's carrying the movie. Of course, he's the main character, but it's one of those you watch and you're like, yeah, this is good stuff. And even trying to put a lot of the datedness of the 80s behind, you can still watch it and just enjoy it for what it is. It is great entertainment, but it's one of those movies you kind of maybe want to take a shower after watching it. But it's what can you say about it? It was you got to see it. You'll have an opinion either way, but
All right.
you're guaranteed an opinion, which I can say is a lot better than some of the movies
that's a good point. Okay, so to be fair, I did not see this movie in its entirety before my assignment for this show. I had seen bits and bobs, of course, like everybody else has, but I was always a bit of a contrarian about it. It's like everybody was saying how great it was, and I just didn't see the appeal. What set me off is I had a friend in junior high that he was one of those kids that had access to like the first VHS bootlegs, like
everybody knows the kid.
Yeah, so he took me after school. He said, you got to check out this movie, and he showed me the last scene. And I'm like, I'm not a prude by any means, Mike, but just the violence of it, even at like,
hey Spielberg,
even at like 14 years old, it's like Jesus. I don't want to. I'm not interested in seeing this. So I just kind of just dismissed it for like 30 years, and I never, I tried to watch a few minutes here, 20 years ago, and it was they were chaining somebody up in the bathtub, and the chainsaws come out, and I came out, I was like. You know what? I'll pass.
I'll pass.
This is probably the day after I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So it's not an issue of like the violence. It was like just the themes involved. I was just kind of turned off by it. So I was very happy to actually get a chance to like.
Everybody's a scuzz. Yeah. It's one of those movies that you can't really point at somebody and say, "Gosh, I can really identify with that guy. He's a hero." Wait.
So I was actually glad to actually have the circumstance where I was forced to watch this from credits to credits. So I sat through the whole thing, and I didn't dislike it by any means, but it was one of those things where I don't know if I necessarily need to see it again. I shared all of the stuff that you said, Mike. Essentially, the performances were great. It's really good cheese,
Yes,
it's incredibly dated, which is it's fine. what I did not expect the political overtones, as you suggested, Mike. I wasn't expecting that to be in there, so I thought that was relatively clever. With he, the first frame,
Yeah.
he says he's a political prisoner, and he's talking about his life and under communism and all that stuff. I was like, whoa, that's a little top tier. I wasn't expecting any of that stuff to come through. So I understand that and the context of where Tony Montana's story, and it was great. But I just kept thinking about this being glamorized for the wrong reasons. And again, as we've gotten older, Mike, we've kind of softened on our hardcore edge on these kind of things, get soft, and our proclivity to watching violent things decreases a little bit. I think I'm just on my time.
Yeah.
If I watched this at 25, I would have been fine with it. But watching it at 53 is like,
Yeah.
ugh, I don't know how I'm cut out for it anymore. Maybe I'm just getting soft or whatever. But
No,
Yeah.
I think we might be getting, it's like I said, it's the Phil Collins, Rod Stewart effect. I think we get softer as we get older.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think this movie, it wouldn't have bothered me so much 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah. Watching it now, it's just gratuitous is like you say, that's a good word.
Yeah,
for it,
it's
anyway.
like, I went from being impressionable one way to being impressionable the other. It's weird, but
Yeah.
but I did really appreciate Pacino, like him or not.
Right.
The performance here was just bonkers, and you
Oh,
and
yeah.
I, that was the premise for us wanting to cover this movie in the first place. Was every once in a while there's an acting performance that just defines a new stereotype or a new, whatever you want to call it, a new paradigm. And Al Pacino certainly pulled it off. So we started to think about other movies that do that. And that phenomenon is interesting when you go back and look at this history of film and performances by era. So for this week's installment of You Just Made the List, Pal, we thought we'd take a look at other acting performances that kind of define their era. That maybe were beyond the pale, but just define who that actor was, what the situations were, what the times were. Just a performance that just reached that upper level stratosphere that can just really be identified with that particular element. So that doesn't make any sense, but you'll kind of understand what we're talking about. We talk about our candidates. So, Mike, let's talk about acting performances that fall into that kind of like paradigm, or that kind of iconic thing where they're just assign themselves or distinguish themselves of a certain era. So you're up first.
For me, it was more or less picking a movie that makes me think of that time. It's and when you watch it, you feel like you're watching a time capsule kind of movie. It's literally like unearthing something and saying that represents that year or that.
Yeah. So
that decade.
Scarface, 1983. That's what 83 was in movies. Right. So
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you got the cheesy music. You got like I said, the shiny gold medallions. For me, a movie that represents the 60s, it would be the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour. Fever Dream comes to mind when I think of this movie. I've only seen it a couple of times, but that's because it's almost incomprehensible to follow, especially if you've seen like Hard Day's Night, which, in a way it's kind of got its own weirdness to it, or Help. Those are actually pretty good. When you watch Magical Mystery Tour, it involves the album itself is kind of weird. There's a couple songs in there that it's that time when the Beatles are starting to have their own experience with certain things. Yeah. And after they visit the yogi and everything. Yeah.
Well, when they got mind enhancing drugs, let's call it what it is.
Let's do that. Yeah. And it's basically them just in a bus and taking these other people with them as they travel across England and do a lot of weird stuff, like having kind of like wacky races and stuff. It's even after watching it, I find it difficult to describe it. It mainly focuses on Ringo Starr and his I think it's his aunt, who are always bickering. But it's so weird. But to me it represents the 1967 specifically, with the Summer of Love and experimenting. This actually came out probably before the summer, and to me it's such a, like I say, just kind of a time capsule of that year. And when you watch it, you were like, these people were wacky back then, and yeah, they were. It's got some great. It's a great soundtrack. It's the Beatles. You can't deny that. But the movie itself is kind of like. It's for acquired taste now. I mean, maybe in 1967, it was like, wow, this is great. I'm really enjoying it. But I'm also on this certain drug that helps me do
Yeah,
it. So,
good point.
which you might need. You might need it for this
Yeah.
movie. So there you go.
All right, that's a
Magical
very
Mystery
clever
Tour.
pick. Thanks, Mike. So that's my first one is going to be tied to a decade as well. So I'm going to go in with the movie Heathers from 1988,
Mhm.
particularly Christian Slater playing the character Jason Dean, his
Mhm.
best Nicholson ripoff. But what was interesting about the movie Heathers is that was what how you address certain topics in the 80s. So there's bullying in there. There's caste societies. There's cliques. There's suicide. I mean, there are hundreds of topics that were just by today's standards are completely taboo. If they do get made, there's a trigger warning. There's like 5 or 6 paragraphs worth of you know text before the movie even starts about if you need help with this, here's these hotlines. But in 1988, we were just fearless, and we would talk about these. We would satire these movies, and it's a very Gen X thing. And I don't like to say those things all the time, but this is an incredibly Gen X take on
Yeah.
suicide and all the tragedies of high school life, and the themes that are addressed in this movie are awful. But they're snarky and they're satirical and quite often extremely funny. But nothing like this could even, attempt to be made in that context of this time. But and then Christian Slater's attitude about the whole thing, because he's the trigger for all this violence. He's the one that's disconnected from it, and again, it's just got a view of society, what it was at that time, and how it was almost acceptable to not have the empathy you're supposed to have, and very very characteristic of our generation, Mike. Unfortunately, when we still have that a little bit, but for me, you can't get more in 1988 than the movie Heathers. Like, so there you go.
Oh, that's you get out of my mind, Justin.
Did I
Because
take one of yours?
no. Even better. I'm taking a castmate from Broken Arrow, and my movie is 1977 Saturday Night Fever with John
Oh,
Travolta.
perfect.
Yeah, who
How
is
did I not even
another.
think of that one? That's crazy.
I don't know. It to me, it's just the quintessential disco movie. He's another Tony, and he's in New York. He's just this ordinary guy who can dance really well, and
Yeah.
it has a really good soundtrack. The movie itself is, like you say about Heather's, is actually, most people think disco dancing, Bee Gees,
Yeah.
competition with the cute girl. It has, it has gang fighting, it has gang banging, it has people almost falling off bridges. I mean, it has constant knife
It's a
fights.
slice of life thing that just happens to have
It
disco in it.
really
People forget
is.
that all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, disco is like, it's a side. But yeah, all you think about is him dancing, pointing up in the air with his white leisure suits. Which can you imagine people wearing leisure suits
Yeah.
nowadays? But yeah, that would be my second pick. Would be that slice of life called
Oh,
Saturday Night
that's a
Fever
great
from
one, Mike. Very
1977.
well done. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
thank
very
you.
cool. So I'm going to stick to the 80s here. I'm going to go, since we talked about Oliver Stone, I think we bear some credence that we need to talk about Michael Douglas' performance as Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall
Mhm.
Street. He was a caricature of every 80s yuppie at the end, maybe beyond that, where he's the yuppie that matured and got evil, and really displayed a character that no one had ever really seen before. A successful villain that just any kind of like financial guy in the world will tell you that Gecko was exactly what he needed to be. And he was a perfect foil for Charlie Sheen, because Charlie Sheen, you know, he came to his realization, about morals and ethics, uh, contrasted against this Gordon Gecko guy. But that scene where Douglas does that speech in front of his shareholders and talks about greed is good.
Greed is
Yeah,
good.
it's iconic for several reasons. One is that guy owned the 80s. That was the signature, that was the Wall Street vision, the 1% before, 25 years before that was even a controversial subject. This is the guy that got rich off the backs of others because he was clever and evil and manipulative and smart to some degree. But I thought, you can't get more 80s than Gordon Gekko at the end of Wall Street there. So like that's my second pick.
That's good, and making $300,000 for writing a screenplay in 1983 is
That's
pretty
pretty
good
good
too.
money.
That's pretty good
Yeah.
grade there. But yeah, let's see. I got some nominations. Kind of piggybacking what you
Yeah.
just said. American Psycho from I guess 2000. No, not 2000. It's like 1996 or 97, wasn't it? Anyway, I thought it represented the 80s
Yeah,
really
it's a good
well.
one.
Patrick Bateman being the kind of
Yeah.
greedy investor slash nut
Yep.
job. I thought the Flintstones. The TV show, not the movie, represented the modern Stone Age pretty well, and the family. But my third pick was Fast Times at Ridgemont High
Oh, good
from
one. Yeah.
I think it's from 1982. But I love I could put Valley Girl with this too, but it Valley Girl is a little bit less believable just because of the language. But I kind of had these both in my head at the same time because I kept thinking the stupid language in Valley
Yeah.
Girl, but Fast Times seemed more believable. It had the greatest spectrum or variety of types of kids that you would actually see in high
Those were
school.
kids I went to high school with. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had the surfer dudes like Spicoli, and you talk about a movie that single handedly brought the popularity of Vans shoes to life.
Yep.
You had that group, and you had
You hit him against your
athletes.
skull to see if you're wasted.
That's right.
Oh, you should be coming on pretty soon, dude. How much do you smoke?
This will be a little demonstration of that. Listen up. That was my skull. I'm so wasted.
And the soundtrack for the movie is great. It has like a real, current to the day soundtrack
Yeah.
for early 80s. And, you have all the typical problems for a lot of people had in high school. And like I said, it just kind of represented to me just a few years before we were in high school, but it did kind of, even though it was in California, it represented a good slice of life for kids and a very realistic look at high school.
Yeah.
Like you said about Wall Street, it was you first look at how that worked. This
Yeah.
was a really good look at a quote unquote real high school. Yeah, so there you go. Fast
All
Times.
right. Well, I've got my last pick here. Then I'll get to my honorable mentions. I'm gonna merge two because they're so similar. I don't think they distinguish themselves from each other. I'm gonna go with there's a couple movies that got for me at least what the '90s became. They were there a few years early, and just really kind of emphasized the prototypical, stereotypical '90s ambition. The actor Campbell Scott, if you remember him in the movie
Oh,
movie
yeah.
Singles. Singles was, of course, set in Seattle in the midst of the grunge movement, and Campbell Scott played this, young 20-something Gen Xer who had aspirations for success, and he wanted the world to be what we all wanted it to be at that time, Mike, where we were all doing the right things for the right reasons. Remember, he wanted to start a high-speed rail in Seattle, and he wanted to serve coffee and play music. And he pitches the plan to the guy at City Council, Tom Skerritt, and the guy goes, "No, I love my car," and that look in his face, and that just to have his dream and his vision of his generation just crushed like that. I just love the way they brought that out. Campbell Scott's an interesting actor. He does a lot of weird things, but he was just perfect in this role. This is how every
Spanish Prisoner is a great movie.
awesome. But he was every 23-year-old kid. And I was about that age when I saw this movie. It's like, hey, I'm that guy, and I would completely pitch what he just said, and to have a man slightly older age and from the generation after him say, no, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, don't do that, and just how it's kind of crushed his life. I think you could say the same thing about Ethan Hawke in Reality Bites that came out a couple years later.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Winona Ryder a lot this week, obviously, but that's another movie about young Gen X angst about trying to make our way in the world. Out of college, what do we do with ourselves? And Ben Stiller was the villain there, but Ben Stiller was probably the guy that was probably going to be successful out of those guys. But Ethan Hawke was the record store kid that played guitar, and he thought all you needed is good conversation and good coffee, and your life would be perfect. And like it or not, we all felt that way back in 1994, and he was saying words that his generation believed to be true. Probably very naive, but just his performance, I think he's one of our best actors. Mike, Ethan Hawke, he always picks for projects, but this one was probably a little commercial for him. But just the themes of that movie they're still there. They can be applicable to the toils and tribulations of millennials and Gen Zers now. just not fitting in and just trying to find your place in the world. So that's my combined final pick there. I had some honorable mentions, of course, Mike. I want to talk about Tom Laughlin's role in Billy Jack from 1971.
Oh yeah.
When Tin Stanger stands alone. You can't get more 70s than Billy Jack. The way he dealt with the racism, he just punch you, he karate kick you.
There you go. It was a cowboy hat.
Yeah, you make fun of those Indian kids, Native Americans. He would just kick your teeth in. So there you go. I think we need to talk about Ben from The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman. I think that was that lost generation there at the end of the 60s that hanging on to the old conventions of society that just kind of faded away. I think he's up there as well. And I think you can sing like, Billy from Easy Rider, Dennis Hopper. You can't get more 60s than that Easy Rider movie with Peter Fonda. But these are all characters that were just set themselves as an iconic image of that era and just were defined the era they were in. So there you go. Wow, that's a lot of talking, Mike. Not used to doing that much talking.
Less talking, more chalking.
Yeah, it's weird that we do a podcast because this is the most we talk. We talk for like an hour every 2 weeks, right? But other than that, I
say like 2 words to our wives.
I maybe say 10 words when I'm not. So stupid. All right, so let's talk about some housekeeping here, guys. So if you liked what you heard for some reason, you can check out our Grumpy Nostalgia page on our Instagram. That's where we have show notes and coming attractions, all that good stuff. You can send us an email at nostalgiagrumps@gmail.com if you feel like you need to do that. Check out our YouTube channel. We have one.
Yay!
That's all I'm going to say about it. I would encourage everybody to check out our new webpage. You go to grumpynostalgia.buzzsprout.com. We've done a facelift. We've actually done like a whole user interface. We added a little contributor sections by me and Mike. You can find out what we're all about. We got a link to some of our favorite podcasts, and there's a little bit about the show in there. If you want to find out more about this dumb show, go to our new webpage and check it out. We appreciate that. So, Mike, that's going to kind of have to wrap it up, buddy. We hit bottom pretty hard. We smacked that pretty good there.
Can we go back to the 80s?
I would love to go back to the 80s. A great year. So, all right. So, guys, thanks for listening. We apologize about the delay in the episode, but we got things to do. So, we're gonna get back on our regular schedule here shortly. We've got some Halloween movies coming up, of course. So, stay tuned for all that good stuff. So, Mike, anything else you want to say before we head out of here tonight?
It's the 80s. Do a lot of coke and vote for Ronald Reagan.
That's right. Yeah, come on, Chi-Chi, get the yayo. All right. So for Mike James, this is Justin, and we will see you again next time.
Stop saying all the time.
It's boring, Tony.